What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Shane Connery Volk. Welcome back to the show.
It is very good to be back, my friend. Holy shit, it's been a long time.
It has. We talked about this. We were backstage. We're like, it has been almost 4 years. It's like when the first issue of Nottingham came out, and that's how I first got to know you. You're
Yep.
the artist on Nottingham. I had David Hazan back on again a couple months ago. So
Beautiful.
if
Beautiful
you're
man.
from
Beautiful David Hazan. Come on.
David is a delight. So if you're familiar with the show, you've heard, but it might have been a while since you've gotten to hear Shane. So I kind of wanted to touch a base with you again of for new listeners, new watchers. How did you get into creating comic books?
Well, speaking of David Hazan, he and I both won the 2019 Mad Cave talent search. So that's how I broke in. I
Yeah.
applied and they liked my weird, dark style and I got paired up with Hazan and then kind of the rest is history. So I've been doing that series now till literally this year. So
Yeah.
we were talking but backstage there, like last issue comes out this month, which is crazy. Three volumes later.
Did you have any expectations? I mean, like you said, you were Mad Cave Talent Search in 2019. Your first project then was Nottingham, and that blew up. Like I think when we talked, Nottingham one had come out, and it was like it was a big hit right off the
Yeah.
gates and things. But like, there's still a difference between a big hit and 3 volumes. You guys had the Tales of Nottingham
Yep.
spinoff. You had Free Comic Book Day. Like, did you expect like that it was going to be this big of a success?
I mean, no, man. Like honestly, that being my first job
Yeah.
ever in comics, I was just, I think I said this on every interview talking about Nottingham. I'm like, I was holding on for dear life that first series, especially. Like I was just trying to figure my shit out, right? Like
Yeah.
so I was so like just engrossed in trying to do a good job and trying to like, I didn't have any expectations. And being brand new to the comics game, I'm like, I already I knew that indie books they're not selling like the big two. Obviously, it's kind of it's apples to oranges even what an indie hit is. But I did know that these things didn't turn into multiple series, right? Like that was so when that first issue came out and it was getting like I think we'd hit 5 reprints or something like that, something
Since
crazy. Yeah, I had no expectations, but it was really cool to see it blow up like that for
and then
sure.
and wasn't like even the book mentioned on Jeopardy as a Jeopardy question at one point?
Yeah, right? I
Like,
know. I
like
know. Like so
it's so good. So where you did the talent shirt search. People don't know you. You're also a musician, super talented in that realm. So like, where did this kind of like desire to say, hey, I want to throw my hat into, this art form of creating comics? Because you had the art form of music and that outlet,
yeah.
being lead singer of band and stuff like that. But where was it where you're like, I want to try and dabble my toe a little bit into comic books?
Well, it's crazy, man. Like comics is my first love. Like I've
Yep.
been drawing since I was a little kid, and so I kind of when I'm a child in the 90s, so especially when all that crazy image stuff was popping off and Todd McFarlane came into my world, it was like, holy shit, this is what I want to do. I want to put as many lines on a comic book page as humanly possible. But at the same time, I was starting to get into music. That's when like all my favorite artists came out. Like I was, 13, 14 years old when I got into like Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Alice in Chains, and so I kind of had these two things happening at once. But I never saw myself as a musician. I always knew that I wanted to be a comic book artist. Like that's what I wanted to do. And so it was kind of one of these reverse things. So I'd done the thing that most like 17-year-olds do. I sent really, really shitty samples out to Marvel and DC and got rejection letters. And then very long story short, I got into acting as well. And through that, I actually got into music and I played on stage for the first time. And I was like, well, shit, this is what I'm doing. So I also I always knew in the back of my mind, like this year's the 20th anniversary, my band's 20th anniversary of One Bad Son. So I always knew when we started that no matter how it went, I'd have time to do comics. Cause I mean,
Yeah.
you can draw when you're 150 years old, right? As long as you got the chops, like they'll
Yep.
give you a job. But as far as being like a rock and roller, I was in my early 20s. It was like, now's the time. If you're going to do a rock band, if you're going to
Right.
get out there and tour. So I knew even then that at some point, no matter how the band did, I was going to get into comic art and really pursue it. And so that kind of happened in around 2017, 18. I really got serious because I'd been drawing the whole time, designing band merch and that kind of stuff. But then I got serious and realized how much I didn't know about illustrating comic books. And then when I landed Nottingham, I really found out how much I didn't know about illustrating comic books. So yeah, so it was kind of a reverse process. It was like music first. And then I got back into comic art and really just, man, I can't thank Mad Cave enough. Chris Fernandez, I think he really went to bat for my weird ass style and saw something in it. So yeah, I mean, I probably doing that series, especially that first series, I probably learned more in
Mhm.
5 books than I would have on my own in 5 years,
Yes.
honestly.
Did you, I feel like a lot of artists have kind of heroes that they look up to or people that inspire them. Where did you kind of get your design style? Because like if people are not familiar with the art, open up a page of Nottingham, you got the more elongated, you got the where did that kind of your style start to develop?
Well,
What
man,
influences?
it's crazy because like I was introduced to comics like most people, mainstream stuff like
Yeah.
Death of Superman got me into comics because I'm a farm kid. Like I came off the farm. We didn't have comic shops. The only comics I ever got was going to the drugstore with my mom would grab me stuff off the spinner rack, and so that series was it hit the news, right? And it was kind of like I learned about comic shops through that, and I think as much as people shit on Death of Superman and you can talk about it as far as its quality and all of that. But you know what? It brought a lot of people into comics and, myself included. So because of that, I'm like, oh, I got to go buy all these Superman comics. And then I discovered comic shops. And so I kind of got introduced through like, Marvel and DC. Because then, of course, from there, that's 91, 92. That's when I was like, holy shit, there's all like, you walk into a comic store as an 11-year-old, you're like, oh my God, like, what is this? Right. And so that's where I found like, yeah, definitely like McFarlane and Liefeld and all those guys. And then I got my first introduction to like Mike Mignola art and
Mhm.
that sort of stuff. So my first love was all like, I love Todd McFarlane because it was so different, right? Like if you were introduced to comic books in 91, you're still getting some of the old, like, some of the older styles from the 80s and 70s. And then you had all this crazy stuff going on. So I love the fact that he just did what he wanted. He had his own style. And I don't, if you looked at my art, you wouldn't see Todd McFarlane in it. I've kind of, when I came back to comics, really got into like Jason Sean Alexander and Sean Murphy and then really got my appreciation for Mignola and like just as much black on a page as you can get without actually just blacking the whole thing out. But yeah, man. So I just my style, as most artists do, you start by emulating the people you love, discover quickly that you're not Sean Murphy, and you discover quickly that you're not Jason Sean Alexander or Mike Mignola, and then you kind of you little pieces are in there. But I just was like, look, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to just kind of let myself out as well. And I will say that like I think my style is comes from rock and roll as well, right? Like it's the best parts of rock and roll, which is like uncontrolled. There's a bit of looseness and just sort of like just going with it and just kind of letting it be. So yeah.
No,
So
and
I didn't put a lot of conscious effort into like the style. It's just like
yes.
kind of let it happen.
And listen, if people want to knock Death of Superman, I know I got it right here on the shelf, and most comic book fans do. So were you always drawing then on the tour bus when you're going and making your band go to comic shops and stuff on the road?
No, no. It's funny because I think like if we're not touring as much as we used to, but if I think now if we were touring as much as we did, I'd probably try to pop into comic shops. Though the life of a rock and roller or any musician is like you never have time to see a city, let alone go to
Right.
a comic shop. You see, I've said this a million times where it's like if you're a touring musician, you see back alleys, you see clubs, and you see like a hotel. That's So you end up in New York City and they're like, what did you do there? I'm like, I slept and I saw whatever dirty back alley of the club was that I played that day, that
So
night.
if we want to get the musicians into the comic book scene, we need to set up shops in the dirty back alleys of cities
Dude,
by a music
you
club.
you put a comic shop in the back of like some, shitty rock and roll club. You'll have a lot of business back there, trust me.
See, I'm just saying, I think we're onto something here.
Hey, you never know, right?
Um, but yeah, so Nottingham was something that's been great. We talked about the success. That's where I fell in love with your art. And at the time of this recording, issue 15, you're wrapping up the third volume of this. How does it feel to, because we'll talk about your new series coming out here in a bit, but to kind of wrap up something that you've been working on for at least 4 years, I feel like, or
Yeah.
involved in some aspect, if not longer, with behind the scenes. So is it like cathartic of like, that's kind of nice to move on, or is it sad? Like, where are you at with like the emotions of like wrapping up the series?
Honestly, man, it's like, yeah, it's bittersweet because I mean,
Yep.
top to bottom, it's 5 years. Like I won the talent search in 2019. So yeah, 5 years. And actually, it's crazy that this moment, I just realized it's kind of 5 years to the date because I submitted at the end of August, right?
Oh, nice.
2019. So that's kind of crazy. Thanks for helping me do that math.
Yes, there we go. Where it's all about making things happen.
Yeah, man. But no, it's bittersweet. Like it's kind of like David's such a killer writer. Like, oh my God, like I could talk about that guy for hours. Like it's just, I miss getting the scripts. Like
Mm,
that's cool because I mean, I get to read the stories and I get to see what happens long before anybody else. Um, and I'll be honest, like it's time. Like I think, we're so like I'm so grateful. I know David is too. The whole team is grateful to have like the fans of the series take us to 3 volumes. And honestly, like the appetite's there. If we wanted to keep going, like and just go, 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 like you could. But it's cool because it just felt like, you know, it's a noir. It needs an end.
yeah.
It needs the whole thing to tie up. And I think, you get your trilogy and that felt great to be able to do that. And if anybody's following it, like David's tying it all up in just a beautiful way. And but I'll say this, like bittersweet part was probably like drawing the sheriff for the last time.
Oh, yes.
That felt weird, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
that's the first character I designed and really put thought into what he was going to look like and all those things. And so the last time I tried not to think of it too much because like I won't lie, like you get weirdly emotional over that.
Yeah.
It's like you hear writers talk about this who have done, such long series and they've lived with those characters. And as an illustrator, same thing. Like you're so intimate with those characters,
Yep.
right? And the sheriff especially, like, yeah, it was that was bittersweet. The last page he appears
Yeah.
on, so you're realize like, man, that's really it. And I think because when you're going through that stuff, it's so intense. I mean, holy shit, this last series, like there are battles, there are like, man, it was a lot of heavy lifting.
It's so
Um,
good, gang. If
it's
First off, if you're not reading Nottingham and you watch my show, what are you doing? I talk about
you
all
get
the
it. You
time.
got to get it.
It's so good. And that was the best part. David, when I had David on, he was like, do you just want to read volume 3 before the I was like, yes. Like I knew like in June, I was like, oh, this is great.
Awesome, man. I'm glad you like it because he tied it up so well, like I
Oh
said.
yeah.
And there was a lot of heavy lifting. So when you're in the middle of it and deadlines are there, you're not having all the appreciation of just like sitting back on that last issue and letting it soak in. You're like, I got to meet my deadlines and all of the comic book things, right? But that page especially, the last time the sheriff appears, I was like, holy shit, like that's it. That is it. I won't do too many spoilers in case anybody hasn't read it and wants to pick it up when this is out. I won't do heavy spoilers, but like I'll just say that this is a finale. Like the
Yep.
sheriff story is over when this is done. So yeah, man, it was
Yeah.
bittersweet for sure, but I'm just so grateful. Like what a ride, what a way to get into comic books. Like yeah, I couldn't ask for a better way to be introduced into the business.
Oh, yeah, and I don't want to get into spoilers either, but I have to say, the last panel, like you throw a little like just nod to the Robin Hood universe, like for fans of that world. Where I was just reading, I'm like, oh no, they didn't. I'm like, that's fantastic.
Well, thanks, man. You know what? I love that the cartoon, especially. I love so much, and actually, all through the series, there's all these little things. Prince John has the crown from the cartoon. It's the identical crown. I used in the second volume. I used little pieces of Kevin Costner's outfit for Robin Hood. Like it's like little things, right? That are
So
sweet.
good.
Yeah. So in that last panel, it wasn't in the script, and I threw it in there in the layouts, and David was down. So I was like, okay, cool. Just it felt right.
And it did. And it was, and it's subtle. It's great. I love it. And if you're a fan of the universe, you'll be like, oh, yep, fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you
Sweet.
have a favorite panel from Nottingham where you're like, this is one I would never get rid of, like Paige, like this is my
You
favorite.
know, there. Great question, man. Honestly, I loved the in volume one. There's a splash where it's looking from behind Robin Hood, and he's looking down over the Merry Men. That was a cool one. There were these moments in the first series, especially where I started to like. I had moments like you could do this, like that actually, like very rarely as an artist are you ever going to be like, oh man, that turned out great. Like, well, I'm so happy with this page. Like, you
Yeah.
never get that feeling. You're always, you get this weird, like, you either feel like it's never finished or you're like, that just, oh man, I didn't quite get it. But there were these moments where you just felt like, shit, that's okay. That looks like where you should go as an artist. And so I forget what page that is exactly, but that's one of my favorite from the whole series. I just love the way that turned out for sure. And then there was lots along the way.
Oh,
I mean, tons of cool stuff. Some of the battle scenes in this last issue in 14, I really like the way they turned out. And as daunting as they were to lay out,
I can imagine.
once you get it, you're like, okay, that's cool. It was worth
Yeah,
it
like
was
I
worth.
feel like volume one, it was like, there's a couple just like, like let's stab someone in the neck real quick
Yep,
and then move on. Where then David's like, cool, volume three, just all out battles.
it's
Like
battle
have
time,
fun,
it's
Shane.
war. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which honestly, man, I mean, if volume three was volume one, I'd be like, I'm not gonna be a comic book artist. I don't know how you can do this, because those scripts come in, and I've heard other artists say this, and it's like it hits you where you're like, I can't draw this. I don't even know how to draw actually. So I'm out. But then you calm down, start tackling it, start breaking it down, and it comes together. So
Oh, so good. Well, the reason I actually brought you on, and so we got to get to it. You have a new series coming out through Mad Cave,
yep,
Prairie Gods. Issue one, I got to check out early. Loved
yep,
it.
awesome.
It hasn't come out yet. So what can people expect from this series that you are drawing but also writing?
Yeah, and I'm coloring it too. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that's been cool. Yeah, man, writing my first series was, I mean, I've had again heaping praise on David Hazan. I mean, getting those scripts for 5 years has been like a real. You get to know what great comic writing is. So, this series again, kudos to Mad Cave for like being down with a couple of weird ideas. Like this series is first of all, it's 5 issues. They're all standalone, so they're all one and done issues, which I love. Like, man, I'm a huge like B movie fan. I love like Highlanders, like one of my top 3 favorite movies. Like, I love that sort of shit, right? Army of Darkness. But I'm a big fan of, like original Star Trek, where every nothing ties in. I love that. It's just like it's the same character, same world, but you're like, you get a weird Western
Yeah.
uh episode, and one where they're like in ancient Greece sort of, so I like that kind of stuff too. And I had this idea. um we could get into how I came up with the idea, but the series itself is set in a town called Broadacres, and so that's it's a stand-in for my actual hometown, little tiny little ghost town that I grew up beside called Broadacres. And so it's akin to it's like Sin City in that you have these characters that exist in a place, but there's a different main character every time, and so you're telling one person's story, and then those characters, they'll pop up in another story, and really sometimes they have something to do with the plot, sometimes they don't. They live there. So and I love that about Sin City. I love that idea that you can sort of play in the world and create new characters and get different sides of that town, and what's going on. And then it all has every story has a paranormal twist, so it's not all specifically horror. You know, the first, so this first book, Race the Devil, is the story of Freddie Davis, who is my dad passed away in 2019, and so this book was for him. My dad's name was Fred, and so Freddie Davis is a tribute to my dad, who always wanted to be a race car driver, and he loved a good ghost story. So this is literally like Freddie Davis races the devil, and when you read the story as you have, you see how that happens and why. But so they're all they're supernatural stories. Sometimes they're kind of ghost stories. Sometimes they're sort of psychological. There's a bit of horror. And on top of that, every issue is something a bit different where, so Race the Devil is a race car story. If you're a fan of like Days of Thunder, which I love, you know, Ford versus Ferrari, that kind of stuff. The second book is a Western because I grew up watching Westerns and stuff too. The third book is takes place in the First World War. So every book is vastly kind of different setting. I've got one that is like there's some time travel and like, you know, I just love any of that stuff. So they're all one and dones. They all take place in Broadacres. Yeah, so you can pick up any issues like the first issue, which I love that kind of thing. So yeah, man, just kind of any idea I could come up with. Part of the idea was that like I've been drawing horses and medieval England for 5 years. So it was time for me to challenge myself to draw some different stuff. So this is also a way for me to, you know, throw in a bunch of different things and challenge myself and draw things that I'm scared to draw. So,
yeah. Well, it almost feels like it's a nod back to, you know, your early days of reading comics, because you said you didn't have a comic shop. You had the drugstore where you had to pick up an issue and you weren't going to be able to figure out what was going to happen because you didn't know what was happening before. Because chances are that you weren't going to get the next issue. So this almost feels like a little love letter to just having those one and done stories. So where did you kind of have this idea?
Well, you know, I kind of was kicking around this idea for a while Nottingham was going on. I had a Patreon going for a while, and between Nottingham books, I was trying to write something that I could serialize on my Patreon. So between Nottingham stuff, just to keep myself going and keep some money and stuff coming in, I was working on the script. Long story short, you know, I wrote a 5-issue series that was like, oh, it took place in some sort of nebulous town, and it had all these characters, and there were all these really like in-depth story going on. And part of the story was that there was this sheriff named Ned Reedy, who you find out he's a revenant. He was murdered in the Old West, and so these characters are intertwining with this guy, and there's all this shit going on. Anyway, I'm telling you that because I wrote at the end of this whole thing, like I had things scripted out. I was like, it was this whole like arc, this whole world happening. And at the very end of the thing, I was like, I wrote a tagline for a book because it was going to be 4 issues of this story. And then the 5th issue was just going to be this like kind of fun standalone Ned Reedy story. And all I wrote was, Ned Reedy tracks down and captures a fugitive using supernatural means. And I was like, holy shit, that's better than this entire thing that I just wrote. I'm like, because I said to myself, I was like, well, I really want to draw that story. That sounds great, but I got to get through all this other shit to get there.
Yeah.
And then I recalled something that a producer said to me years ago. The band was writing a song. He comes bursting into the room while we were writing the song, and he's like, hey guys, you know that part that you keep making me sit through to get to the good part? He's like, don't fucking play that anymore. And then it really hit me where I'm like, yeah, all of this stuff that you wrote is not as good as this idea, this little like, so very long story short, I was like, that's cool. It's just kind of this one-off story with this sort of nebulous character that does, you know, and it just sort of, it hit me. I'm like, that would be a cool series if maybe they all kind of, you know, and I had these kind of other ideas at the same time. And I'm like, why, you could just make those all of the series instead of trying to do this. You know, I'm not at this moment in time, I'm not going to be able to write the next saga. Like, you know, I can't do David Hazan shit where I'm like planning volumes of stories with all these interconnecting characters. So I was like, this is perfect for me. It's like one and done stories. I get to focus on a character, do like a really condensed storytelling. And Yeah, so that's really where it came from, is like, I tell that story because anybody who writes for months on end and then realizes everything they wrote is garbage, it's like, that's kind of how it goes, you know? But if it got you to one good idea, it was all worth it. So yeah, so that's where it came from for sure.
That's so cool. Is writing, I assume, being, a musician, involved with a lot of songwriting.
Yeah.
How do you challenge, or I guess change from songwriting to comic writing? Are there similarities to it, or are they completely different animals in and of itself?
Well, it's a great question, man. Honestly, tons of similarities. So writing lyrics, I would write a lot of kind of storytelling lyrics,
Okay.
and I wrote songs based on movies and stuff too, which I just like, so I love the storytelling of it. But it's very similar. Like when you disappear into lyrics, whether or not you're telling a story or you're just expressing feelings, like you really get to disappear into that world and inhabit it. And I found that while I was writing this series, I'm like, this is so similar to story or to songwriting, because you're
Mm.
just disappearing into this story. And cool because you get to, like, I really liked writing dialogue, was a ton of fun, more than I was a little nervous about that to start, but neat because I get to call on some of my acting experience where you get to sort of, you know, be a character in your mind. And so yeah, a lot of similarities. And I was a little daunted by the writing process to start, but I really started to enjoy it. Like it became a ton of fun. Also, I made a deal with myself to not think of the artist while I was writing, because I'm like, just make it cool, like write the shit you want to write. Don't worry about the artist right now. And I'll tell you this, I had a moment where I thought of David because, I get a Nottingham script and I love David to death. He's like, he's like family to me now. But I'd be like, fucking David, like, you make me draw another battle scene, more horses. Like, come on, man. Like, give me a day off, right? And I had a moment. This actually happened during Race the Devil, where I flipped the script to the next page. I'm like, come on, like, you're not gonna make me. And my artist brain forgot that I actually wrote the thing. I was like, I was pissed at the writer. So I'm like, okay, David, you're
Ugh,
off the hook. I get it. I get
that
it. So
Shane is the worst.
that's
Well,
Shane.
I was gonna ask you, like, is it harder to, draw something than that you wrote? Like, are you tougher? Like, do you like, are you gonna craft it? But you were like, I had to separate it myself completely of like, I'm
Yeah.
just focusing on like that someone else is gonna draw this, so that
Yeah.
way you could focus on the story you wanted to tell. That's so cool.
Exactly. Yeah, man. And, obviously, like, I am still aware of the fact that it's a comic book, and I think every writer should be aware that, like, you do have to think of the fact that this has to be illustrated. Like, you have to be able to draw it and make it make sense, right? Like, you can't just put anything you feel like on a page, because, like, some shit is just, it's next to impossible. So I wrote with like deadlines in mind, and also this whole thing takes place in the prairies. So like there were open skies, I didn't set it. I have ideas for stories that'll take place in cities and stuff. So I knew it would be a slightly easier lift because
Yeah.
Nottingham was a lot of research and stuff and trying to, get buildings to look at least like be in that world and that kind of thing. So it was easier lift in that, like, this basically takes place in a world that like I grew up in, so I can like see those things. And but no, I separated myself. Artist and writer were very separate for sure.
That's so good. Well, and then it may feel like this too. This is a series that, like you said, it's 5 issues. But if you wanted to, it could expand, and you could bring
Yeah,
in other people to write a story that you draw, or vice versa, or they
yeah.
draw a story that you write. So I think it kind of is a cool, because there's so much one and done. It kind of just gives you a whole forte of like whatever you want to try.
100%, man. And honestly, I thought about that. Like, it would be fun depending on how it's received and all that. I mean, the cool thing with this series is I really did it for myself. Like I said, especially this
Yep.
this first book was for my dad, and it was cool to just create, not thinking of sales and the
Yep.
things that they're important. You must sell books if you want a career. But it was cool to disappear into it and be able to do a thing that was really for me, and while at the same time, while I was doing that, I thought, like, man, that would be cool to get see what another writer would do and to keep in this world. And you know, again, it's very much built like a TV show, like in that, like, you could get a writer to give you a cool script for some new ideas and stuff. And honestly, I did this series with like B movie or like you know, kind of 60s TV sort of vibes in it, or 70s kind of TV, where the, you know, the world is pretty small as far as like even the uh like the supernatural stuff. Like, you could go crazy, like the devil could have looked like Ghost Rider with like fire and
Right.
stuff, but in my mind I was like, you want to be able to film this, you should be able to take this book and give it to a director with like $20,000 and like make this thing, you know, super cheap, low budget. Like, that was the idea. So that was cool. And yeah, to get back to your point, like, you know, if you found writers that were into that sort of thing and wanted to challenge themselves to be like, this is not an issue you're setting up for other issues. Like, it's got to be over when it's over. And it was a fun challenge to do that.
Well, and I've always heard writers say like one of the best things you can do as a new writer is kind of get into an anthology, or like you're saying, write a one and done story, because it basically makes you, like your producer says, trim the fat, get to the good stuff. Like
Yeah.
you can't beat around the bush if you only have 8 pages in an anthology, or if you only have 22 pages to tell a story and say, I hope you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know, it's a great exercise. Like and the way I love the storytelling that I love, like Race the Devil, there's a lot of open questions.
Mm.
You know, it leaves you with like, I'm not going to explain the whole thing to you. I love when you get to leave a movie or you're watching a show and a lot of it's left to your imagination of like, you know, I think that was while I was writing it, I was thinking about like the original Star Wars trilogy and why a lot of the new Star Wars stuff doesn't hit. And I think that to me, I'm like, I the stuff that I like in new Star Wars is when they do new stuff.
Mm.
You know, I don't need everything explained. I think part of the magic with Star Wars was like, man, I don't know, who is Anakin Skywalker?
Yeah.
How did that work? How did he turn into Darth Vader? As soon as I saw it on screen, I'm like, well, that's cool, but like, you know, like,
Yeah.
kind of like, it's a bit of a bummer because like that thing that sparks your imagination to fill all those blanks in on your own is part of what makes it magical, right? Like, you know, I love that stuff. So with this series, that's part of the deal too, is you're going to get a cool story and like a satisfying story, but I'm not going to tell you about all of the background. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff for you to fill in on your own. Like, why is Freddie Davis racing the devil? Well, you know, once you read it, you can guess yourself. Is there something deeper? Maybe there isn't. Maybe there is.
Well, it almost makes it like you're not, I don't want to say forcing the reader to, but it almost is like you're having, like you're making us have conversations with friends, like you said, walking out of a movie going, would you not, and like be like, nah, dude, that wasn't what he meant, he meant this, like this
I
is what
love
happened.
that
Like,
stuff, man.
it's such a
Yeah.
good like dialogue then to have, and like of what it speaks to you, because that is also art, right? What it can mean to
Yep.
somebody might mean something else to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think, you know, I'm thinking, what's the Inception, you know,
Yep.
with the spinning top, brilliant to go that way of like, what happened, right? Everybody at the end, they spent the next, you know, months talking about what the hell did it stop? Does it go, you know, I love that stuff because great art should get you to use your own imagination, right? And I think, and I'm not shitting on Star Wars because I think part of the problem is that fans have demanded, well, I want to know, and like we
Right.
want to know this stuff because it drives you crazy that you don't know certain things that you think might be important, right? And so creators have given people what they wanted, then they turn around and they don't like it.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know? So that's like,
it's a tough thing to balance, right? Like you
yeah,
look at, I'm a big fan of the TV show Lost, and that was one of those that it was a huge thing of,
yeah,
we got to have certain questions answered, and some did, and then like some were like, well, I don't like how you answered my question. It's like, well, maybe better just have left your questions unanswered then.
right. Totally. And I think dude, that's funny. During the pandemic, my wife and I actually, we rewatched Lost. That's funny that you bring that up. And I was like, yeah, like the first few seasons, you're like, your mind is going because you're like, what the hell is going on here? Every weird new thing that comes in, you're like, this is, but you know, when they explain it, I don't know that there's any way you could end a show like that where everyone's like, oh, that felt fantastic. I
Right.
love the way they ended that because everyone, actually, George Lucas himself said he's like, the problem with the prequels was that everyone had already written them in their heads. So
Mm.
when I give them my version of it, they didn't like it because it wasn't as good as what they expected. And to your point, that's a tough thing when you're trying to give people things they're asking for, right? And I always think the better way to go is give them something they're not expecting, as opposed to give them what they want.
I,
That doesn't mean to be super subversive and like shit on people's
right.
love of things. There's a balance there, but like do something surprising. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
again, with Nottingham, I think David did a great job of that because like what's the sequel going to be? Well, he turned it from a very kind of personal, like little noir like crime story to like, oh shit, all of a sudden this is kind of like sort of Lethal Weapon in the Holy Land. Like what the hell? Like it's so cool, right?
Yeah.
Aliens is a great uh, version of that as well. How do you make a great sequel to Alien? Like this, man, horrifying. I remember seeing that movie for the first time.
Yeah.
It scared the shit out of me. Then I saw Aliens, and you're like, oh, that's a cool sequel. It's like they are not redoing the original.
Nope.
I would not have asked for that if it was up to me as a fan. So anyway,
It
I
works.
digress. I
No,
love when art is left for you to interpret and assume that your audience is smart, assume that they have imaginations and let them fill in some blanks. I love that.
I love it. Yeah, no, my wife and I'd made her go watch all of Lost with me this last fall, before we went to a Comic Con where some of the actors and actresses from Lost were going to be at. I'm like, we got to do this. Like,
Oh,
we,
if they're going to be, yeah, if the cast is going to be there, you got to watch it.
I was
And I'll
like,
be honest, on the second watch, I enjoyed the ending probably more than I did the first time around, but probably because back in the day when you had to wait every week and you
yes,
spent 5 years of your life.
it's insane.
Side note, I think in our time now, you're watching a Netflix series and you can cut through it in a weekend. So even if you weren't super happy with the end, you're like, it was still
Right.
good. But like back in the day, you put like 5 years of your life into a TV show. So I think when it ends, there's a double thing happening. Either, well, you didn't like the end, fine, but you're more like you're so sad that you spent so much time and it dawns on you. It's almost like back in the day, like, on original Nintendo where you couldn't save your progress. And you had that horrible feeling when you finally beat the big boss. It was so empty and you felt so shitty because it's just credits roll and they're like, you just wasted like 6 months of your life. I think that's part of the deal. You kind of die inside twice
Yes.
because you hated the ending and you realize that's all you've been doing for 5 years. Anyway, like I said,
No,
I digress.
no, it's so good. Uh, well, one of the things you mentioned too was, an artist you were talking about that you liked and appreciated with Jason Sean Alexander. And correct me if I'm not wrong, but he does a variant cover on this, correct?
Ah, dude, I told you you're a good interviewer, man. Honestly, what a get. I like we threw that out to him and he was down to do it, which is crazy because I know how
That's so
busy he
good.
is. Like, man,
Yeah.
that guy, like, speaking of trying to get your shit done on time, I do not know how he can do the amount of work he does the way he works. But yeah, like one of my all-time heroes. I love his work. So we threw that out to him and he did like just in a killer cover. Like I'll tell you, it was one of my favorite moments in comics to date was when his rough like he sends the layout right and he's like, hey, are you guys cool with this? I'm like, dude, you could take a toothbrush and just spatter it onto a page and I would be like, that's, you did it, like, thank you, perfect. But anyway, and then when I saw the finished art all colored and oh my god, I was like, that's crazy to you know write those characters and create a world and then have somebody like him do his like take on it. It was, yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, that's the variant cover to Race the Devil. You can get the Jason Sean Alexander variant.
That's so cool. I mean, you're just gonna make me spend more money.
Well,
So
I mean, I guess that's the point of variants. But they Mad Cave wanted to do a variant, and I said,
yes,
well, if we're gonna do one, like, let's go for the biggest we can get. Like, how big can we go? Why not? I mean, if you're gonna do a variant, I do. No matter what I put out, whether it's music, movies, comics, you just want to make it worth people's while.
mhm,
So if you're gonna ask them to buy a variant, make it worth their while, right? Like you want to give them the coolest shit you can, and maybe try to get the biggest name you can. So yeah, so I appreciate your extra $3, buddy.
I listen. I will happily give it. To you. because you're probably gonna have to give that to Jason.
Yeah, well, you know, he gets a cut of that for sure.
So I will happily give that to you to go. So, well, Shane, I want to, respect your time. And those
Yeah, man. Hey, you know
listening. So,
me. I babble here, so I probably ran you over time.
no, you're perfect. You're fine. So where can people follow along with you with what you're working on, uh, what you got
Well,
coming out, so they know?
yeah, man. I got a website, shaneconneryvolk.com. I'm currently kind of overhauling that, but best place to see my art right now is on Instagram. You can follow Shane Connery Volk on Instagram, but my art page, Art of SCV, you can follow both of those. But I post art to that all the time, so you get kind of behind the scenes looks and stuff that I'm working on. Actually, I don't mind showing you this right now. I'm working on the. I got the.
Oh, look at that.
It's actually kind of nice that it's blurring out because I'm probably not supposed to show you that anyways. But that's a new. There's a new Prairie Gods cover that I'm working on right now. So I'm posting all stuff like that
Yeah.
on my Instagram. But you can also follow me on Twitter, Shane C Volk, Facebook if you still are there. So basically, if you Google Shane Connery Volk, my stuff pops up. But I would say if you want to see a lot of art stuff, Art of SCV on Instagram is the place to go.
Yeah. Gang, go check it out. So Nottingham's wrapping up, comes out August 28th.
Yep.
Prairie Gods issue number 1 comes out September 4th. Both from Mad Cave Studios. Got to check them out. They're so good, gang. Shane, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me.
Thank you, man. And I'm going to say this before you go. Thanks for being an advocate for indie comics, man. I mean, the big two are going to sell. I love a Batman book as much as anybody else, but honestly, we don't get to have careers in indie comics if not for people like you. So thank you so much, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So I just love getting to talk with creators, and like I said, we could talk for hours. So, but well, gang, go support Prairie Gods. And with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, nerd out.
Yeah.
Peace.